When your own mother introduces you as a distant relative at a party she's throwing in the house you grew up in, a house she redecorated without a trace of your childhood, something inside you dies in real time, and it doesn't make a sound. I hadn't been home in 2 years, and even saying the word home felt like I was borrowing a term that didn't belong to me anymore, like when you use someone else's name tag because yours got lost. The last time I stood on that porch, I was 18, holding a duffel bag packed with half my wardrobe and my laptop in a cracked case, leaving for college with a scholarship I worked blood and bone for, and no one waving goodbye. It was the first week of June when I came back. I'd planned my visit carefully, coordinating it with the lull between semesters and after my work-study gig ended. The idea wasn't to surprise anyone. I had texted my mother 2 weeks earlier, just a simple, "Hey, thinking of coming down the weekend of the 10th. Will that work?" Her reply was almost mechanical. "Sure. Let me know when your bus gets in." No emojis. No exclamation points. Just a monosyllabic green bubble that felt more like a schedule update than a welcome. I hadn't even told her about the award I won last semester or the summer internship I snagged with one of the local advocacy groups. I kept wondering if she'd ask, if she'd show even the faintest spark of interest. She didn't. When the Greyhound finally rolled into that sad, sunburned little depot just outside town, I stepped off with a tight grip on my rolling suitcase, and this dumb hope bubbling up in my chest like I was 17 again, hoping for a hug that never came. There were only a handful of people waiting on the platform, mostly older folks or moms with strollers. No sign of Samantha. I waited for 10 minutes before I saw her car, a new white Lexus SUV with tinted windows and rims so shiny I could see my dumb, anxious face in them. She waved at me like she was flagging down a neighbor across the street. No smile. No getting out of the car. Just a flick of fingers through the half-cracked driver's side window and a look that said, "You're late," even though I wasn't. I climbed in without a word, adjusting my seatbelt as she turned down the radio, playing some lazy pop remix that didn't suit her at all. We drove in silence for almost 5 minutes before she asked, "So, are you still doing that social work thing?" I blinked, trying not to let it sting. "Yeah. I'm working on policy research this summer. Housing access and tenant rights." That's nice," she cut in, nodding like she was listening, but her eyes were on the road, on the rearview mirror, anywhere but me. "Damon's into politics too. You'll probably have lots to talk about." "Damon?" I asked, the name unfamiliar, too casual to be just a friend, too important to be someone passing through. She smiled then, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in years, and said, "My fiancé. He moved in last fall." I felt the air shift in the car like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees despite the hot sun beating down on the windshield. My mom was 44, not old, but the idea of a fiancé was new, strange. I stared out the window, wondering what other details I had missed during the years of half-texts and stilted birthday calls. When we pulled into the driveway, the house didn't look like the house I'd grown up in. The bricks were painted a pale beige color now. The yard had been landscaped with those decorative rocks and desert plants that people install when they want it to look expensive but low maintenance. Gone were the old wind chimes, the faded lawn flamingo I used to hate as a kid but now missed painfully. Inside, it was worse. Cold hardwood floors where there used to be mismatched carpet. A sleek, modern kitchen with steel appliances I knew she couldn't have afforded on her salary alone. A giant abstract painting hung above the couch, and in the corner, where our old piano used to be, the one I spent hours plinking away at as a kid, there was now a wine bar with backlighting and imported glasses. I just stood there, still holding my suitcase, trying to find a single piece of my past that hadn't been stripped or replaced. My mom turned around, arms folded, and said, "You can drop your stuff in the guest room. Damon's using the other as a home office." "The guest room," I repeated, dumbly. "What happened to my room?" She shrugged like it was nothing. "Turned it into a fitness space. Got a Peloton during lockdown. Damon uses it too. You'll like the guest bed, it's memory foam." I nodded, forcing my legs to move as I dragged my suitcase down the hall to the small room with a bland gray bedspread and a hotel art print of a tree at sunset. I sat down and tried to breathe, ignoring the tightness in my chest. I didn't even have to open the closet to know there'd be nothing of mine inside. I stayed quiet during dinner. Damon joined us, all 6'3" of him, with arms like a gym rat and a tan that looked sprayed on. He greeted me like I was an old friend, smiling too wide, asking questions that sounded rehearsed. "So, college girl, what are you majoring in again? Something with feelings, right?" "Social work," I replied, stabbing a piece of roasted chicken with more force than necessary. He chuckled, shaking his head like I'd just told a joke. That's noble. Don't think I could ever do that. Way too emotional for me." Samantha laughed with him, tossing her hair over her shoulder like she was auditioning for a younger role in her own life. I stared at my plate, counting the peas. 23. 24. After dinner, they announced there was a neighborhood get-together that evening. "Just a few people from around the block," Samantha said, smoothing her hair in the mirror. "I told everyone you were visiting." That gave me a flicker of warmth. Maybe she was trying, in her own weird way. Maybe I was just being too sensitive, reading too much into things like always. We walked over to the Miller's house, which was twice the size it used to be and had a renovated back patio with string lights and one of those fire pits that look like they belong in a magazine. I followed behind them, half a step out of sync, pretending I didn't see the way her hand slipped into Damon's as they laughed together. The moment came when she introduced me to a group of neighbors standing by the grill, all smiles and small talk. She sipped her wine, then gestured toward me and said, "This is Clara. My niece, she's visiting for a few days." I didn't understand at first. My brain refused to accept it, like I had misheard her, like she meant to say daughter, and it had come out wrong. But the smiles from the others, polite, casual, unconcerned, confirmed what I'd heard. My niece. I stood there, smiling back through clenched teeth, nodding dumbly as one of the women asked what college I went to. My mom didn't even correct herself. We didn't talk on the way home. I waited until Damon went to bed. He kissed her cheek like he owned her, and then I asked her straight out, no anger in my voice, just a quiet disbelief. "Why did you say I was your niece?" She scoffed like I'd accused her of something trivial, like spilling wine on a cushion. "I didn't think it mattered. You don't even live here anymore." "That doesn't change who I am," I said, feeling the room tilt, the walls press in. She leaned on the counter, eyes sharp and unkind. "You ruin everything, Clara. You always have." I was finally happy, and then you show up. "Why did you even come?" "I love him." "I don't love you." It didn't feel like a slap. It felt like watching the last bridge burn from the other side, knowing you can never go back. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded, walked back to the guest room, packed my things in silence. Before I left, I stepped into my old bedroom, or what used to be mine, and stood in the center of the floor. The air smelled like rubber and sweat from the exercise mat rolled up in the corner. My old corkboard with photos and pinned poems was gone. The ceiling still had the faint shadow of the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up there when I was 13. And that's where I realized something so deep and sad it almost felt peaceful. There was no space left in this house for who I was, and no place for who I've become. I left that night without another word. No doors slammed. No final confrontation. Just a slow, quiet departure. The kind that leaves no sound but echoes for years. It's a strange kind of grief when the person you're mourning is still alive, still breathing somewhere under the same sky, possibly laughing, making coffee, brushing her hair with the same flick of the wrist you inherited, but dead to you in every way that matters. That's what my mother became to me after that night. Not a ghost. Not even a villain. Just gone. Vanished from the story of my life, like she was never written into it properly in the first place. After I left the house that night, the quiet inside the Uber I called was louder than any argument we could have had. I stared out the window, watching streetlights flicker past like pieces of some old movie reel I didn't belong in anymore. I didn't have a destination when I punched in the address, just the name of a cheap motel I remembered from my teenage years, the kind that smelled like mildew and air freshener fighting to the death. I stayed there for 2 nights, living off vending machine crackers and dollar store shampoo, until I scraped together enough courage to call a friend back in the city and ask if I could crash on her couch for a week. I didn't explain why. I didn't tell her what my mother said. I didn't mention Damon or the party or the word niece. I just said I needed somewhere to land, and she didn't ask for more. That's how you know who your people are. For the next few months, I became a master at folding myself into the cracks of other people's lives. I lived out of a duffel bag, took the kind of part-time jobs that required no smiling but paid enough to survive. I sold textbooks I didn't technically own anymore, borrowed sweaters from my roommate's closet, and became fluent in the language of scraping by without falling apart. I didn't answer calls from home because they never came. I didn't check my email because I already knew there wouldn't be one from her. I didn't go to my graduation. I let the day pass like a regular afternoon, folding laundry in silence, watching the shadows move across the walls of a room I shared with a girl named Mina who had grown up in a foster system that made my life look like a Hallmark special. She never asked too many questions, and in return, I never lied to her. We built our bond out of shared silences and midnight snack runs, from the way we didn't flinch when the other one cried unexpectedly in the kitchen. One night, I found her sitting in the bathtub fully clothed, eating dry cereal from the box. She looked up and said, "This feels like home somehow," and I sat down on the floor beside her, not asking anything. Over time, I built something like a life. It was small and imperfect, but it was mine. I took a job at a nonprofit shelter downtown, answering phones and checking in clients who looked like they hadn't been heard in years. There was something addictive about the way people opened up when you looked them in the eye and didn't flinch. I saw parts of myself in their stories, in the girl who ran away from a mother who sold her pills for rent, in the man who couldn't say the word father without spitting afterward. The work was hard. It was messy. Some days I'd go home and scrub my hands raw in the sink, like the pain I'd witnessed could be washed off. But there was also something deeply anchoring about it, knowing that even if no one was coming to save you, you could still stand beside someone else while they tried to save themselves. It was there, between filing forms and organizing closets full of donated coats, that I met Naomi. She was a program director, about 45, with short, no-nonsense hair and a voice like gravel and sunlight. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was the kind of smile that made you feel like maybe you'd earned something. She taught me how to advocate without apologizing, how to talk to social workers like a firecracker and a diplomat at the same time. She didn't ask about my past, not directly, but she seemed to know, in that strange intuitive way some women just know, what it means to grow up learning to make yourself small so other people don't step on you by accident. I still remember the day she handed me a stack of forms and said, "You should apply for the coordinator position. You're already doing the work anyway." I stared at her like she'd just suggested I run for mayor. "Me?" I asked, and she raised an eyebrow like she was daring me to say no to myself again. I applied. I got it. And when I signed the contract, sitting in a cramped break room with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, I felt a quiet shift inside me, like I'd just stepped into my own name for the first time in years. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment not long after, furnished with pieces I thrifted from the community center donation pile and a mattress someone left in the hallway with a note that said, "Clean, I promise." My first night there, I sat on the floor with a bowl of instant noodles and cried harder than I ever had in my life, not because I was sad, but because I finally had a door I could lock from the inside. I had a lamp that I picked out. A chipped mug that belonged to no one but me. I finally had space. And yet, every now and then, I'd feel it, that old, low ache in my chest that came up like smoke from a fire that had long since burned out. I started therapy not long after moving in. A community program offered it for staff at the shelter, and Naomi gently pushed the flyer across the desk one day and said, "It's not weakness, kid. It's maintenance." I stared at it for a full minute before folding it and putting it in my bag. I didn't expect to like it. I definitely didn't expect it to hurt. But week by week, I found myself unpacking pieces of my past I'd buried under productivity and polite deflection. I talked about Samantha, though I never once called her mom in those sessions. I talked about the boyfriends who came and went like bad weather, about the sound of slammed doors and passive-aggressive silence, about the way she used to tell me I was too much whenever I cried or asked questions she didn't want to answer. My therapist once asked me if I believed love had to be earned, and without thinking, I said, yes. She paused, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "That's not love, Clara. That's performance. Love doesn't hand out report cards." That hit harder than I expected. Around my 22nd birthday, I wrote a piece for a local magazine. It was short, under 1,000 words, about resilience and building something out of scraps. I didn't mention names. I didn't go into details. But when it published, I got emails from strangers who said they saw themselves in it. One woman wrote, "I thought I was the only one who didn't call her mother on her birthday." That made me cry for 2 full hours. On my 23rd birthday, I bought myself a cupcake from a little corner bakery, just a simple vanilla one with white frosting and a plastic heart stuck in the top. I walked it home like it was a treasure, set it on my chipped coffee table, and lit the single candle I had left from a box of 5. I didn't invite anyone over. I didn't post about it. I didn't wait for a call that wasn't coming. I just sat there, the soft flicker of the candle reflecting off the dark window, and whispered, "Happy birthday, Clara. You made it." And I smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because I was. For the first time, I wasn't trying to earn anyone's love. I wasn't auditioning for a part in someone else's life. I was just a girl with a cupcake and a flame, and that was enough. I didn't need Samantha to say she was proud of me anymore, because I was finally proud of myself. It had been 983 days since I last saw my mother, and I only know that number because I used to count them like they were prison bars on the wall of a cell I built out of old memories, missed calls that never came, and the heavy, aching silence of being forgotten by someone who gave birth to you. So when I heard the knock at my apartment door that Thursday night, I wasn't expecting anything except maybe a neighbor needing to borrow a plunger or another misplaced delivery of Thai food. But when I opened the door and saw her standing there like the ghost of my worst day given skin and bones, I forgot how to breathe for a full 30 seconds. She looked ruined. There's no delicate way to put it. Her eyes were sunken, hollowed out like someone had scooped the light from them with a dull spoon. The mascara had melted down her cheeks like bruises weeped out from inside. Her hair, once perfectly blown out and sprayed into place like a magazine ad, now hung in greasy, matted clumps around her face. Her blouse, a pale lavender thing I remembered her loving, was wrinkled and clinging to her frame like it didn't recognize her anymore. She said my name like it was a confession. "Clara." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at her, my mind rifling through every possible reason she could be here like it was flipping flashcards in a panic. I half wondered if this was a dream, one of those awful ones where the past shows up uninvited and smiles like nothing happened. But then she did something I never expected. She cried. Not the performative, tight-throated sniffles she used to let out whenever she wanted to look tragic and misunderstood, but real sobs heaving, uncontrolled, body-racking sobs that made her fold in on herself like a paper cup crushed under a boot. She leaned against the doorframe, clutching her stomach as if the pain was physical, as if everything inside her had broken at once and she couldn't hold it together anymore. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered between hiccups. "I've lost everything." And somehow, despite everything, despite the party and the words and the silence that followed, I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on my couch like she was afraid it would collapse under her. She kept glancing around the room like she expected someone else to be here. Maybe Damon, maybe an audience, maybe the version of me who still begged for her approval. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was 24 now. I paid my own bills. I bought my own toothpaste. I built this space with bruised hands and secondhand furniture, and no one got to walk in here and pretend the past didn't happen. Do you want water? I asked, because offering comfort still came too naturally, and I hated myself a little for it. She nodded, hands trembling in her lap, and I walked into the kitchen, taking slow, deliberate steps like I needed to prove something to the floor. I filled a glass from the tap, not the filtered pitcher, not the nice mug I used for guests, just a regular glass, clean but impersonal. She took it like it weighed more than she could carry. "I'm sorry to show up like this," she said finally, after a long silence that stretched so tight it felt like it might snap. But I didn't know what else to do. I sat across from her, keeping the coffee table between us like a line drawn in the dirt before a battle. "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice flat, even. "What happened?" She laughed, a sharp, bitter thing that held no humor. "Damon happened," she said. "That charming little monster you warned me about. He cheated on me. With my best friend. And then he drained my account. Cleared out the joint savings. Took everything and left the keys on the counter like he was returning a rental car." I didn't say anything. She kept talking, her words rushing out like a flood she'd tried to hold back for too long. "The house went into foreclosure. I missed too many payments. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone. I kept thinking I could fix it. I sold the car. I maxed out the cards. I even sold my jewelry. The real stuff, not the knockoffs. And then, she said, voice cracking again, I woke up one morning with nothing. No job. No money. No friends. I've been couch surfing for weeks. You're all I have left." She looked at me then, her eyes so wet and raw I felt something twist deep in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but a distant echo of it. Maybe grief. Maybe the ghost of love I buried a long time ago. "You're all I have left," she repeated, her voice barely audible now. "Please, Clara. Help me." I let her stay. Just for the night. Not because she deserved it. Not because I forgave her. But because I couldn't be the kind of person who closed the door on someone at their lowest, even if that someone was the same person who once slammed the door on me and never looked back. She took the couch. I gave her a blanket I didn't care about and a pillow from the closet. I offered no apology, no warmth, just a place to sleep and a glass of water she didn't finish. That night, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the creak of the cushions as she shifted in her sleep. My childhood came back in waves, the screaming matches over nothing, the boyfriends who smelled like whiskey and cheap cologne, the way she used to say, "You're exhausting," whenever I tried to show her who I really was. She hadn't changed. Not really. When I confronted her the next morning, asked her why she'd never reached out, why she let years pass without so much as a text, she brushed it off like it was weather. "I didn't know how," she said, eyes darting away. "I figured you hated me, that you didn't want anything to do with me." I stared at her, stunned. "You called me your niece, Samantha. You told me you didn't love me. What was I supposed to think?" She flinched at that, the name hitting her like a slap. "I was scared," she said finally. "I didn't know how to love you. You were always too much. Too smart. Too emotional. I didn't know what to do with you." I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was a child. It wasn't your job to know what to do with me. It was your job to raise me." She didn't argue. She didn't cry again. She just sat there, hollowed out, nodding like she finally understood how deep the wound went. "You're not staying," I said, clear and firm. "I'll help you find a shelter or a program. There are resources. I know them. But you're not staying here. And we are not pretending this didn't happen." She nodded again. And, for the first time, I saw something real in her eyes. Not shame. Not even regret. But maybe acceptance. Later that night, I watched her sleep on my couch, this woman who once told me to get out of her life because I ruined everything. Her face was turned toward the cushions, her hair spread out like ash on the pillowcase, and for one terrifying moment, I saw myself in her. Not her pain, not her ruin, but the shape of her hand, the angle of her jaw, the faint scar above her eyebrow she got when she tripped carrying me up the stairs when I was 4. And I whispered, quiet enough for only the darkness to hear, I don't hate you. But I don't trust you either. When you spend your entire life building armor just to survive your own blood, it's a special kind of terrifying to even think about lowering the drawbridge, even a few inches, and letting the person who broke you step onto it. But healing, I've learned, isn't some dramatic, all-at-once epiphany. It's quieter than that. Sometimes it's just showing up. Sometimes it's watching your mother cry in a folding chair during a group session and deciding, despite every scar she left on your soul, to keep showing up too. The morning after Samantha slept on my couch, her mascara still smudged into the fabric, her presence lingering like the scent of unresolved grief. I made coffee without offering her any and called the local women's rehab and transitional housing program I had referred dozens of clients to but never once imagined using for my own mother. They knew me well, trusted me, and when I explained the situation, vaguely, without using words like abandonment, emotional neglect, or this woman once introduced me as her niece, they said there was a bed available in a shared room. But she'd have to commit to the program's full intake process, including substance screening, mandatory counseling, and weekly life skills workshops. I relayed all this to her in a flat, businesslike tone as she sat on the edge of my couch cushion, arms crossed like a scolded teenager. To my surprise, she didn't argue. She just nodded and said, okay. I offered to drive her, but she insisted on walking. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the only thing left she could control. She packed the tote bag I gave her with the clothes she came in wearing, a second-hand coat I hadn't worn in over a year, and a travel-sized bottle of dry shampoo I tossed in at the last second. She hugged me at the doorway, quick and stiff, like she didn't quite know how to ask for it, and I let her. I didn't say, good luck. I didn't say, I love you. I said, don't waste this. And she nodded. The program required 90 days minimum before participants were allowed to make unsupervised visits or have overnight stays with family. I didn't mind the distance. In fact, it gave me breathing room. Gave her breathing room too. She had rules now. Boundaries. Expectations she couldn't manipulate or sweet-talk her way around. In the beginning, her updates came in secondhand. A counselor I knew at the shelter would mention that she'd shown up late to group or had refused to participate in a journaling exercise. I wasn't surprised. Humility wasn't something Samantha had ever practiced, and rehab wasn't some magical transformation machine. It was messy. It was humiliating. And for someone who had spent decades curating an image of strength and polish, it was probably hell. 3 weeks in, I received a short email through the program's digital platform. Just 5 lines, written like a telegram. Hi, Clara. I'm here. It's hard. I almost left twice. I thought of you and stayed. I hope that means something. S. I didn't reply right away. I sat with it. I let it live in my inbox like a fragile egg I wasn't ready to crack open yet. The first time I saw her at the center, she looked smaller. Not physically, though she had lost weight, but spiritually. Like the performance had been stripped away and all that was left was a woman who had finally realized how much of herself had been built on lies and running. Her hair was pulled back into a simple bun, her nails bare, her eyes clearer than I remembered. We sat across from each other in the courtyard, the silence between us thick with old wounds and unspoken expectations. She offered me a paper cup of lukewarm tea and smiled, not the forced, stretch-lip kind she used to weaponize in public, but a quiet, tired smile that said, I'm not pretending today. We talked about the weather, the food, the other women. She told me about her roommate, a 50-something former nurse who had lost her license and her family to pills and pride. "She snores like a dying lawnmower," Samantha said with a little laugh. "But she's kind. She listens." I almost asked, "Did you ever listen to me?" But I didn't. Instead, I said, "That's good." And it was. As the weeks passed, our visits became more frequent, more layered. Some days she was chipper, chatting about resume workshops and budgeting classes. Other days, she was raw, tearful, distant, shaken by something a counselor had unearthed in group therapy. She confessed once, voice trembling over a cafeteria sandwich, that she had chased youth not because she wanted to stay young, but because growing up meant confronting the way her own mother abandoned her. "I didn't know how to be a mom," she whispered, tearing the crust from her bread. "No one ever showed me how. I thought if I could stay young enough, I wouldn't have to become her. But I did anyway. I became worse. I didn't jump to comfort her. I didn't reach across the table and take her hand. I just nodded once slowly and let the silence be her consequence." She began attending the program's mother-daughter healing sessions, which I had previously thought were little more than emotionally loaded landmines dressed up as community building. But the facilitator was solid, a retired therapist who didn't sugarcoat a damn thing, and slowly, I started to see something shift. Samantha began using the word sorry without following it with a reason. She began saying, "I was wrong," instead of "I was trying my best." She began asking questions about me, about my work, about my boundaries, and then actually listened to the answers. It wasn't an apology parade. There were no grand gestures, no crying in the rain speeches that fixed everything in one breath. But it was real. It was steady. And for the first time in my life, I felt like she wasn't just trying to look like a better person, she was trying to be one. One afternoon in late spring, we cooked together in the center's communal kitchen. It was a program event, family day, open to the few relatives brave enough to engage with the aftermath of someone's rock bottom. The air smelled like garlic and healing and forced optimism. I chopped onions while she stirred sauce in a dented pot that had probably survived more trauma than either of us. We didn't talk much. Just worked side by side, occasionally exchanging glances and small smiles, the kind that felt earned. She laughed at one point, genuinely, loudly, tilting her head back the way I remembered from childhood. Not at me. Not for me. Just for herself. It was jarring. Beautiful, even. I watched her talk with another resident, a woman with tear tattoos and arms full of faded track marks, and for a moment, she looked like someone else entirely. Not the woman who kicked me out of her house, not the stranger who called me her niece, but someone softer, more honest, less performative. Someone human. The letter came 2 weeks later. Handwritten. Folded into a floral envelope that looked like something from a greeting card aisle. "Clara, this isn't an apology asking for something. It's not a manipulation. It's not an olive branch I expect you to grab. This is me saying thank you. Not for the couch or the coffee or the referral, but for being stronger than I ever was. You were always more grown up than me. I used to resent that. Now I respect it. I don't know what our future looks like. I won't assume anything, but I hope someday I earn the right to call myself your mother again. Samantha." I held the letter in my hands for a long time, reading it again and again, waiting for the usual cynicism to kick in, for the familiar voice in my head to scream, "Don't believe it. She's just trying to come back." But it never did. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like a con. It felt like a step. And I could meet her there. Not with arms open. Not with forgiveness stamped and signed. But with something realer. A smile. A reply. A beginning. Sometimes, the most radical act of love is deciding who not to let break you again, not because you hate them, not because you want revenge, but because you finally understand that love without boundaries is just another name for self-destruction. And by the time I stood behind the microphone at the shelter's annual gala, staring out at the sea of folding chairs filled with people who believed in second chances, I finally knew what I wanted to say. Not about my mother, not even about my pain, but about the kind of love I chose to grow instead. It was a warm night in early June when they asked me to speak. I was 25, and by then I had learned how to live without flinching every time the phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I had a stable position at the shelter, not entry-level, not assistant, but full coordinator, with a title printed on a business card that I kept taped to my desk more as a reminder than a brag. I had plants I kept alive. A savings account that wasn't just symbolic. A circle of people who didn't share my blood, but knew every scar I carried and never asked me to hide them. The event was held in the community center's refurbished auditorium, a space that still smelled faintly of bleach and cafeteria pizza, but now had new paint and better lighting and a stage that didn't creak when you walked on it. The guest list was a mix of donors, volunteers, current residents, and a handful of local officials pretending they cared more than their policies suggested. I didn't prepare a speech. I couldn't. Every time I tried, it came out sounding too neat, too rehearsed, too far from the truth. So I spoke from memory, from scars, from strength. I didn't grow up with safety, I began, my voice steady even though my hands trembled at my sides, hidden by the podium. I didn't grow up with warmth or celebration or unconditional anything. What I had was survival and the quiet, exhausting belief that if I worked hard enough, stayed small enough, and succeeded just right, maybe someone would decide I was worth keeping. I paused then, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. People leaned in, not the way you lean into tragedy, but the way you lean into truth when it starts to mirror your own. But that never happened, I continued. And for a long time, I thought that meant something was wrong with me. That I wasn't lovable. That I hadn't earned it. It took years, therapy, friendship, loss, and a lot of damn paperwork to realize that love isn't a test. It's not something you have to pass. Real love shows up even when you fail. Especially when you fail. I looked around the room then, locking eyes with a woman I had once checked in during a snowstorm when she had nothing but a backpack and a broken wrist. She was now in transitional housing, employed, steady. She smiled at me, tears on her cheeks. I work at a shelter now, I said. And it's not because I want to fix people. It's because I know what it feels like to be forgotten, to be told, in 1,000 different ways, that you don't belong. I made a decision a long time ago that I would not carry forward the pain that was handed to me. I didn't break the cycle with forgiveness. I broke it with boundaries, with self-respect, with the decision to choose family that chose me back. The applause was soft at first, then steady, then rising. But the loudest sound in my ears was silence, the kind that comes when your soul exhales for the first time in years. A week later, I met my mother for coffee. I chose the cafe, quiet, unassuming, no memories attached. I arrived early, sat in the corner, ordered a plain latte with almond milk, and waited. I have hoped she wouldn't show up. I have hoped she would. When she did arrive, she was 15 minutes late and looked more put together than I'd seen her in years. No makeup, no fake smile. Just jeans, a cardigan, and a paper notebook tucked under her arm, like she still didn't quite know how to live without armor. She sat down without asking if it was okay. I let it slide. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered it. "I'm here," I replied, not unkindly, but clearly. She ordered chamomile tea and didn't sugarcoat a single thing. "I'm in subsidized housing now. I have a roommate. It's small, but it's clean. I'm working part-time at the center, helping with admin. It's not glamorous, but it keeps me busy." I nodded, watching her carefully. She wasn't trying to impress me. That was new. I go to meetings 3 times a week. I still talk to the counselor. I still journal, even when I don't want to. I screw up sometimes. I get defensive. But I don't leave. I don't run. I stay. Another pause. "I don't expect anything from you. I don't want to rewrite history or pretend I didn't mess up more times than I can count. I just want to know if I can be someone you don't flinch from. It hit harder than I expected, because she didn't ask to be my mother again. She asked to be someone I could stand to look at. She asked for humanity, not reunion. And I could respect that. I don't know what this is, I told her honestly. And I don't know what it could be. But I don't flinch. She smiled then. Just once. Just briefly. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a trap. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't sit on the edge of my bed analyzing every word, every glance, every quiet between us. Instead, I called Mina, my former roommate who now lived 3 blocks away, and told her I was grateful she let me crash on her couch when I had nowhere else to go. Then I called Naomi, my mentor, my shield, the woman who once told me therapy wasn't weakness, and left a voicemail that simply said, "Thank you for everything you saw in me before I could see it myself." I ended the night the way I end most nights, brushing my teeth, feeding my plants, sipping water, locking my door not out of fear but out of ritual. Before I turned off the lights, I looked at the small photo frame on my shelf, the one that didn't hold any childhood memories or family portraits, but instead showed me surrounded by women I had worked with at the shelter. We were smiling. All of us. Not because everything was perfect, but because we had survived something together. That was my family. Not by blood, but by choice. And that, I realized, was the most powerful love I had ever known.